Well, let's dive in. Let's dive in. And we'll begin with a little silence. So you remember we've talked about this really quite a lot. So the 3 programs for happiness. And when we started this study a few weeks ago on the Sermon on the Mount, we did chapter 4 out of Matthew's Gospel first. And chapter 4 does not contain any part of the Sermon on the Mount, but it's the prelude to the Sermon on the Mount. So for context and sort of what was he doing before the sermon, we went to chapter 4. And we discovered chapter 4 to be a pretty important, even vital setup to the Sermon on the Mount and then subsequently to the whole gospel itself. Because if we're looking for values to live by in the Sermon on the Mount, we find the counter values in the temptation scene, which is the beginning of chapter 4. So it's really for the teachers in the crowd, it's really sort of standard fare for teaching. It's a great pedagogy. We're gonna teach sort of what to do by first introducing an example of an alternate or what not to do. And so the 3 temptations can correspond to Thomas Keating's 3 programs for happiness. And you'll recall that the 3 programs for happiness are, and I'll share my screen, are universal. And they're at sort of the bottom here of this screen share. Have I shared the screen? Have I got the 3 programs up? Okay, great. Yeah, so the first, and in no particular order, the first one is esteem and approval, the second one is survival and security, and the third one is power and control. And we always, or Keating, and subsequently us, always offer a fourth over-identification with my group. So whatever the Harrisons or the Kentuckians or the Episcopalians or the Republicans, whatever they want and think and say, that's my deal. Like, I'm all in. And I feel uncomfortable when I'm out of congruence with whatever my tribe or my group is doing and saying. Happy when I'm in, not happy when I'm out. The teaching is, for the 3 primary programs for happiness, that we have them in place by the time we're 8 years old. They're just a result of our environment. It doesn't mean we had bad parents. It doesn't mean our parents had bad parents. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It doesn't mean we need to go on a crusade and shame or blame anybody. It just is. Keating calls it the human condition. And he takes it all the way back to the Garden of Eden and uses it as a metaphor for what traditionally has been called the fall. And suggests that it's not that Adam and Eve were, they ruined it for us all. It's that Adam and Eve were humans. And humans have a propensity, according to the environment in which we're raised, to put other things, namely something in these 3 areas, into the empty space within our own bodies and lives where God desires to dwell. We work out our plans and programs for happiness by trying to get people to like us, by trying to work out some means by which we can survive and be secure, and or trying to work out a way to always be in control. The trouble with the programs for happiness is they don't work on a sustainable level. Just as soon as I get John and Kathy and Mike to like me, darn it, I got to get Marilla and Jim to like me too. And then I got to wake up and do it all over the next day. And Keating always says, or used to, God rest his soul, he's gone off to heaven now, but he always used to say, and there's 6 million people on the planet. So even if you could get 60 to love you, how are you going to get the rest? It's an unworkable plan. So it's not a problem to have a program for happiness. It's a fact of life. If we want to use the word problem, and I'm comfortable with it, the problem is continuing in our program for happiness. It's like not being aware of it. A problem for a parent could be, well, I didn't do anything wrong to my kids ever, so they don't have this problem. They don't have a program for happiness because I was a perfect parent. Stop it. No one is trying to blame or shame anybody. We just pass on our anxiety. It's just a fact. All parents do it. And the sooner we accept that and begin to be helpful by being aware, the sooner we can teach our children to assume an inner stance through things like spiritual practice, meditation, that makes them, all of us, vulnerable to God's presence with and within us, which will dismantle over time our programs for happiness. This is what one of the things that meditation does. It, especially in the centering prayer method that we teach and practice, it invites an inner stance, so a stance within my own body and being, that makes me vulnerable. And I'm vulnerable because I've let go of my thinking and feeling for the moment. Makes me vulnerable to the overcoming and therapeutic presence of God in my own being, which Keating always says is the beginning of the dismantling of the programs for happiness. And the dismantling of the programs for happiness is not a once and for all deal, right? So even Jesus in the temptation scene, it's not like he's now done with the devil, right? In fact, we have a really good example in the narrative where Peter, much later in the gospel from Matthew 4, I don't have chapter and verse for you, but you'll recognize the story. Peter comes to Jesus when Jesus is turning down esteem and approval, and he's turning down power and control, and probably we could work it out that he's also turning down survival and security. So probably turning down all three programs for happiness. And Peter says, don't do that. You're the Messiah. You know, this thing, I've got a plan. And what does Jesus say to Peter? Get behind me, Satan, right? So it's not like even for Jesus, once there's like a one day we dismantle the programs and we're done with them. It's one day at a time for the rest of our lives, right? Or we can lean into them and indulge. And we all could give testimony to how that doesn't work out very well. It leads to misery and codependence, you know. So meditation is taking a break in a regular way to commune with God, frankly, to put it simply, and to assume an inner stance that makes us vulnerable to God's dismantling our programs. I was thinking about an example of this, and I won't sort of go into the particulars of it, but I happen to have in my monkey mind right now, right this second, a couple of things that I'm tempted to obsess about. Because the truth is I'm powerless over them, but I'm subject to the program of happiness of power and control. So my monkey mind wants to sort of just turn them over and turn them over and turn them over and try to figure out a way to get in control. Because I'll feel more inner peace if with these two particular things, just in my life, I mean, I'm a parent and I've got a job, so you can probably fill in the blank about whatever they might be. You've got them too, I'm sure. And so what I'm aware of is that even if I got control over these two things, it's not a sustainable plan. And what I'm also aware of is that I actually can't get control over them. I really actually am powerless over these two particular things in my life. And that this is really actually a great time for me to double down on my discipline of my own spiritual practice of letting go, you know? And what happens when we let go is that we create space. And it's space where grace is inclined to flow. And so when we let go, God moves in. And you never know what's going to happen when God moves in. You know? So, as we go into this little period of silence, and I'll hold us in just a few minutes, we can sort of know that all the things that tempt us are the same things that Jesus was tempted by. And what a good teacher who just lays out an example and then subsequent examples of how this sort of works. And what a good teacher who gives us an alternate to indulging in our own programs. And the alternate is the values and the ethic that we learn in the Sermon on the Mount. And what a good teacher who gives us instruction about the grace of silent prayer which comes in the Sermon on the Mount too, as you know. And what a good teacher who sits with us, our Jesus, in the very silence we're about to enter into. So now the silence after the scripture which says, "Be still and know that I am God." Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right. Jim Clifton, I'm going to put you on the spot as you get up. And I'll apologize for it now and later. So you were in the study on Sunday, and we had a technical difficulty, which I apologize for, and you got cut off right as you were about to share on the 3 programs for happiness. And sorry about that. We've straightened out our technical difficulty, and hopefully it won't happen again. although it might. But B, really why I'm putting you on the spot is I'm curious, since we just talked about the 3 programs, do you remember what you were going to share? I caught the first part of it and it was very intriguing. Do you remember what you were going to say?
Yeah, I don't know. I suffer from terminal uniqueness, so I can't be that I only have 3 programs, right? so at some level, it's real comforting to know we all sort of share and hold those different interpretations, certainly, but we all have the same ailments, right? We face them. Jesus faced them. There's some comfort, odd comfort in knowing it is maybe that simple, right? Because my only point of view is through the 2 eyes I look through, and sometimes my life feels completely out of control, completely complicated, and so different than you. It's overwhelming sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And so to sort of bring it all back to something, I'm not alone.
Yep.
I'm not unique.
Yep.
And in fact, Jesus walked before me, and there is a path. Right?
Yeah.
So all that's sort of oddly comforting to me, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that funny? Isn't that sort of this beautiful, funny little paradox that something like the 3 programs for happiness, which are really shining a light on our deficiencies, right? If we can say it playfully, are a comfort, because within that valley of defect or deficiency, we find solidarity. Because when I get down there, if I'm understanding you correctly, when I get down there, Jim, you know who I'm going to find? You. And we can walk together. And my particulars are different from yours, but if we sit together long enough and tell story long enough, there's solidarity and similarity. Am I understanding you correctly? Is that essence of a piece of what you're...
Yeah. And I think the differences between us suddenly go away, right? The issues that carve us apart, we have common ground to get to, and the struggles of this life, all that other stuff just dissipates.
Yep.
Color of your skin, where you're from, who's your daddy,
yep.
All the Southern things we love to talk about.
Yeah.
Don't matter.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Or matter less, I should say, maybe.
Yeah. One of the things that really strikes me about the 3 programs for happiness, and the reason I find them to be fundamentally helpful to Christians who follow Jesus, is that what they're doing is inviting reflection, really, I think, upon one monumental thing, and that is my powerlessness. I would submit, and we could talk this through, that if you show me an obsession, whether it's mine or yours or Nancy's or Thomas's, anybody's, if we sit with it long enough and tell story long enough, we can trace it, all of us could trace it back, root it down into powerlessness. The reason I want power and control, and that's going to make me feel good, is because I'm feeling powerless. The reason I want it to be esteemed and approved as a happiness plan is because I feel powerless. Same with survival and security. And what Jesus does in the temptation scene is say, yep, powerlessness is the way to go. It's frankly, I think, the meaning of the cross. And what we know is that if we will fully surrender to the truth of our own powerlessness, we will experience resurrection. I mean, this is the fundamentals of Christian belief. But as long as we resist the truth of our own powerlessness by indulging the programs, well, it's like Dr. Phil says, how's that working out for you? Well, I stay up all night obsessing, trying to come up with a plan to get Jim to like me, or whatever the program is. Trying to figure out how I remember being like 19 years old, or not 19, maybe I was first on my own, so 22. And I went through like a 30-day period of being sure that if I won the lottery, everything would be okay. I don't know. I mean, you've got your own thing. Survival and security, right? I was scared. That's all. I was just scared. I was in a different state. I was on my own. Parents had said, hey, you're time to pay your own bills, you got to go through it. They didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. You know, it's powerlessness. I didn't win the lottery, by the way. I did it the old-fashioned way. I got a job, worked hard, learned how to manage my life. You know.
They've got a TV show, Henry, Life After the Lottery.
Yeah.
And they're not pretty stories.
No, that's right. You know, interestingly, John, one of the things God, you just mirrored something. My financial planner friend or investment friend, John Brooks, just mirrored something. That's one of the things we did was meet with somebody like you back in those days. It was a long time ago, 25 years ago probably. But that's one of the first things that we were taught was people who win the lottery mostly lose it all. It's some crazy percentage, isn't it, John? It's like gone in 2 years or something insane. Yeah. Same with big inheritances and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I read a study that's relevant to the lottery thing you're talking about, but just connected for me with what you were saying about programs for happiness.
Yeah.
Which is that upon first winning a big amount of money, people are euphoric and very happy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, and this didn't trace what happened to the money, but it traced what happened to the people's feelings. It was a psychology study.
Yeah.
Within, like you say, about 2 years, or less, they were back to wherever they had been before their levels of happiness. But they were saying that this could sort of explain a sort of addictive quality of like wealthy people wanting more money.
Yeah.
And sometimes making bad choices to get the more money because it's getting the money that brings them some momentary happiness. It's not having the money. So they always want more. And that reminded me of what you were saying about the programs for happiness, where it's never enough.
Right.
You need someone else to like you, or you need to go back and check that that person still likes you.
Right.
It gets that obsessive thing. But it seems like it applies to that windfalls of money also.
I think you're right. And I think this is a perfect segue. So, and again, we're not sitting here doing a self-help thing. What I think is so cool, though there's nothing wrong with self-help, right? What I think is so amazing and beautiful is this is the gospel. So let's dive in. So chapter 5. So what we've been talking about with the programs for happiness and what's presented in chapter 4 is self-dependency, right? You know, making my own way and that being the plan for life, that I'm always Henry dependent. Now, we do want responsibility. I did pull up my bootstraps. I did get a job. I am a grown adult human being who, is responsible and all this kind of stuff. But finally, what we get out of the gospel is God dependency. So what I want to do is read chapter 5, verses 1 through the appointed verses for today, which is 16. So chapter 5, 1 through 16. So each time we get together, we're going to read everything that we studied before. Does that make sense? So we're going to incrementally we're just going to read it over and over again. So we'll always be gathering the text that we studied the week before. So as we sort of launch off from the programs for happiness, we can imagine the Beatitudes as the alternate to the programs for happiness, as they illustrate in poetic form people who are impoverished of the need to work out their programs for happiness on their own and are rather trying to lean into God dependency. So, Kathy Clark, would you read for us this morning? And again, we'll read Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, which starts the sermon, through verse 16, which, if I'm correct, and I think I am, are the verses appointed for today. Or includes the verses appointed for today.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? it is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven.
All right. Thank you. So, it's the question we always ask. So in any of that, with particular attention to the salt and light, so verses 13 through 16, but also including the Beatitudes, what emerges for you? What reaches out and grabs you in some way or another, whether it raises a question, gives you hope, gives you pause, gives you concern, and also asks sort of the same of whatever you've been able to read in Amy Jill Levine's treatment of this part of the Sermon on the Mount.
I like the part for today, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. One, it's very comforting. It says where I'm something worthwhile. But it's also an interesting sort of balance to, like, blessed are the poor in spirit and blessed are the meek, because one might, from reading that, have thought they would say, be modest and don't let your light shine, rather draw the curtains or something, don't be boastful. But it's interesting that it doesn't mean you have to hide your goodness.
Yep. Excellent. Building on that, Marilla, what does it say? If it doesn't mean you have to hide your goodness, what does it say about how we share our goodness, maybe?
I guess for me, and it's just one limited view, that in a sort of natural way, you just let it be seen, just like a light would be. You just do something in a straightforward way, and you don't have to boast about it, but nor do you have to pretend you didn't do it or cover it up or say, oh, it was nothing. Or that's what I feel, but I'm sure there's more in there.
Sure.
Well, I think the salt and light is there among everything. I mean, they're daily things that we all, even today, have contact with, right? Salt and light, common, I guess, daily things. So it kind of makes me think about how the list of Beatitudes is pretty extreme for me as a white, privileged, middle-class person, right? I mean, some of those things I may not feel I come into contact with daily. But salt and light, that's there all the time and there to notice and live into those metaphors, I guess, even amidst difficult things, ordinary days, those types of things. So that's how it speaks to me.
Yeah. Beautifully put. So on page 47 in Levine's book, there's a couple of sentences that I think sort of build on what Cynthia's sharing. She says, this is a first full paragraph on the top of the page. First, to get at the heart of the statement, we need to address the reference not only to salt, but also to the earth. You are salt of the earth. The disciples do not exist to show off their taste or color. They exist not for themselves, but for the world. The disciples are to season, to color, to make a lot more alive the world. And then here's a reference to Genesis. Their very presence is a blessing. When any person sees them, that person can take heart in knowing that the disciples represent what is good in the world. So it's not an egoic drive, right? It's salt enhances inherent or native flavor. So Richard Rohr makes this point about the salt and the light, and he makes it in particular about the light. He says, note that Jesus didn't say you're the house or the banquet or sort of the thing that is lit up by the light. You are the light. Does that make sense? And it doesn't say you're the roast, you're the main course. You're the salt that brings out what's inherent or native about the blessing of the main course. So it really is a servant stance in the most holistic and Christian way.
Both those things have such a purpose in it.
Oh, good.
It gives me the feeling that, my life has purpose.
Yep.
Salt is to enhance flavor. Light is to be shined and shared. That's what I was kind of thinking about, Marilla, when you were talking, and it does give me that good feeling.
Wow,
I'd say more importantly, salt is a preservative, especially in this time and age, right?
Yeah.
We're curing hams right now, so I'm salting hams, and they last forever when you salt them, almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So it gives a real sacred, building on Jim and John, it gives a real sacred utility, doesn't it, to my vocation as a human, as a follower of Jesus.
So what is the salt preserving here, Jim or whoever?
I don't know, it says salt of the earth. Are we preserving creation of creation? I mean, that was the thing that struck me too, is very elemental references of creation, I think. That always gets me back to universal Christ. In you.
So when you say universal Christ, like preserving the Christ's presence in the world, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know.
In the Message, it says, let me tell you why you're here. You're here to be salt's seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness and will end up in the garbage.
It almost seems like, if I'm looking for an answer to your question, Cynthia, that it would be that it's life. Like real, deep, abundant life. That's what it's preserving. It's bringing it to light in each person, and then, like, it's not really doing the preserving, but it is. Like, Christ is the one who does the preserving, but we as extensions of him are inviting them into that life is abundant and full.
And what could it mean? What could it mean when we think about ourselves in community, especially in a community that's got some diversity to it, whatever shape, tone, tenor that diversity takes. If we're the salt of the earth or the salt of the gathered community, what could that mean for the way we relate to the members of the community? Now we might want to, at this point with that question, it might sort of put on the lens of the 5 stones, and we're looking for our values, right?
Was it last week, Henry, when I was asking you, all right, what do we do? What's the answer? And you said you probably won't like this, but it's just living your life, being the light, being the salt. It's not saying, Henry, here's how you need to change. You need to do this, this, and this. It's let me live my life and let me shine the glory.
Yeah.
And to go back to something that Levine says, she talks about how you can have too little salt, but too much salt is worse. And so I think, Henry, to your question, what does I think it goes back to enhancing, the idea of enhancing and not overpowering. Mm-hmm. It's like you wouldn't, as salt, we wouldn't want to overpower or be prescriptive or what's the word I'm looking for? I think being too salty would be going straight to issues, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
In the five stones. And I guess maybe helping to integrate the values in the five stone pieces rather than, like I say, going straight to issues.
Yeah.
Well, and it feels like what that process does really is take away the parts of it that we want to grasp control of, even in the doing good things. That it's keeping it balanced in a way that we're not able to make happen, that, like, it's God's work that seeps through, not just God's work plus our good ideas and well-meaning spirits.
Yeah.
But, like, I think the over-saltiness happens when we are still clutching to it and not letting it just be his journey that we're a part of and try to make it stamped with us.
Sure. Reminds me, Amy, of the teaching of the mystics. Merton used to talk about this. You, Hendry, don't know what love is until you have finally loved someone with no need to change them. Like the fullness of love is when I love John Brooks with zero, like sincerely, zero need to change him, you know? So is one of the things the salt is preserving, back to Cynthia's question, if it's a preservative, and certainly it is it preserving the Johnness of John? Because you said this last week too, John, you mirrored it back to us. Healthy people do what? They grow. Healthy people grow. So if I'm the salt of the earth and not the main course, Jesus didn't say, you're the model. I hope they make everybody over in the image of Thomas and Hendry. They're the greatest, you know? In fact, when the disciples said, are we the greatest? He was like, hell no, you're not the greatest. That's a dumb question. Stop it. That's my paraphrase, by the way. But does the salt, here, I was looking for this. Let me share my screen. So, this will shock you. I'm going to take this to spiral dynamics. Have I got the spiral dynamics up? Okay. So if we're the salt of the earth, remember this is just a map, it's not the map. But if we're the salt of the earth, then let's say John Brooks is up here at Integral, but he's trying to integrate the value of being the salt because he's learned it from the Sermon on the Mount, and he's in conversation with one of his blue or amber traditional friends. He's not going to try to tie a rope around him and drag him up to Integral. That's not the salt. What's he going to do? He's going to honor them right where they are. And, you know, if they want to talk about patriotism, he's going to listen to them and appreciate that they love their country. And then if he gets the opportunity, he's going to gently share about how he loves his country. You know? And he might even, if he's like the salt that's letting God sort of be the chef, if I can play with the metaphor, you know, John's gonna sort of be open to the opportunity to talk about, not using this language, but the evolution of his patriotism, right? He probably wouldn't use sort of technical language like evolution, but you know, it's sort of like the story of how when he was a young boy, you know, helped with the flag, and then, you know, I don't know, whatever the story is, doesn't matter. But the salt says, no, I honor you right where you are. And the salt knows that healthy people grow and that we're not trying to make each other over in our own images. We're not whipping votes. Is that the right use of that political term? We're not whipping votes. Stop it. I mean, if you're supposed to whip votes because you're a member of Congress, go do that. Great. And be good at it. Whatever. But most of us are not that. We're this cohort of Christians trying to be salt. And if we're light, then and it's like, oh man. And we're talking to our friends whose center of gravity is gray, and we're like, oh, tell me about the Black Lives Matter march. Like, I'd like to know your journey with that. Will you tell me about that? And that's us shining a light on something that they're passionate about. And we're just okay with it. And even if we disagree with it, we're not the police. Strike that. We're not the check and balance for their ethical or moral lives. We're the light that shines on their story. So one of the things we know is that if we start down here at blue, a chief value that emerges for blue is heritage. So traditional is blue. Some teachers use amber, but I've been using blue over here on the right-hand side, if you remember. A chief value at this stage of consciousness is heritage. So we're proud of our people and our country and our roots and our story and our ethnicity, right? And that's great. Wonderful. We're proud of the Harrisons and the Brooks and the Enscos. Awesome. We're proud that our family's been at Good Shepherd for generations. Heritage. So if we're the salt, we talk heritage sincerely. When you move into orange, there's an evolution, and a chief value is liberty. And if you think of the founding fathers, so-called, that makes perfect sense. They moved out of the British monarchy, the high Roman Catholic sort of era, into independence and liberty. So if we're the salt, we're shining a light on liberty and telling our own story about how we appreciate that as a value also, right? And we don't cast out heritage, we include it, transcend and include. And as we move into late orange or late modernity, we value fairness. So we've gone from heritage to liberty to fairness. And fairness is sort of this capitalistic ethic or ethos of everybody having an opportunity to succeed, right? This is why in peak orange, you often find folks who want less government because government regulates and dims the liberty of the individual. And the perception is that it dims or diminishes opportunity, right? So if we're the salt, then we're talking about an appreciation for that fairness value. And if we're really a mature sort of version of the salt, we can say, no, I'm down with you on this part of that value. Like, this is how fairness is enunciated, articulated in my own life. I get what you're saying. And then when we move into green, the value that comes online is caring. Because we realize that fairness actually, while it was a value we held and still hold, it doesn't go the distance. Because everybody doesn't actually have equal opportunity. You know, fairness was coming on, let's see, fairness, did I get there? Yeah, fairness was coming online when our founding fathers wrote the Declaration and the Constitution, and they said stuff like all men are created equal. So can you feel how that's fairness coming online? But it wasn't full caring value coming online because it left out women and it had a real diminishment of black people. You know what I mean? So it wasn't just the full maturation. So if I'm salt, one of the things I can do if I'm light is both acknowledge and appreciate the reality of that's the value you have online, whether it's heritage, liberty, fairness, caring. And those are just one-word examples. We could come up with a multitude of other symbol words to describe them. So I can honor, shine a light on the reality of that, and then also appreciate it, right? Like acknowledge, honor, hold it up, and then gently begin to tell my own story about how I've moved or grown, you know? And I think salt doesn't overdo it. And this is where we can go back to food. Yes, salt is good on eggs or pot roast. But boy, there's a line, isn't there? Do we all know this? There's a line where it's like, whoop, I don't know, that was too much. And now we got to throw the whole plate out. We can do that with each other. There's a point where I can go overboard. If I'm full-blown center of gravity green, I can talk to my blue and orange center of gravity friends and be salty and beautiful and honor them, and we're telling story, but there's a point where I can go too far, and I've now left them behind. Does that make sense?
Hendry?
Yeah.
So I think with the salt too, with what you're saying and kind of with our conversation, I think part of it for me is it's a important part, but it's a small part of the whole. And you also there's a point where what you can do ends.
Yeah.
And it's like that's where you depend on God. You
Amen.
have to know when to say, okay, this is where I add to it, or this is what kind of where I'm being myself and I'm helping the situation.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm trying to do too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Oh, beautifully put, Skip. Oh, because we're the salt finally that's sort of spread by God, as it were, shook out, as it were, on the world by God, on our neighbors by God. Yeah, beautifully put.
It's interesting in the modern language, though. If I say, "Boy, Hendry was a little salty today," it's a negative or a
probably
anger,
means I cussed, right, Lee, or something like
irritation, or it's not what the Sermon on the Mount's describing.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
I think it's somehow talking about, even though you might say a little, what you really mean is a lot. I think it's referring to that over salting where you're coming on too strong.
Yeah.
What's that old saying? Attraction, not promotion.
Yep. Yeah. What do y'all think about the middle of page 48 in Levine's book? She writes this: to be the salt of the earth means to be true to oneself. The disciple does not have to think about being salt. The disciple is salt. I'll read further. I realize that sounds a tad weird, as if one is saying you're a chair or you're a hot pepper. The idea comes from the Beatitudes. Just as the disciples know that they are already blessed, already loved, already part of a new family of faith, they also know that their nature has changed. They are not pieces of dust. They are not specks of dirt. They are salt. They do not just have motivation. They are motivation.
I think that goes back to what we talked about last week, that she said this, at the beginning of the book, she said the Sermon on the Mount is like a pep talk.
Yeah.
Which I'd never thought of before.
Yeah.
I'll just share this real quickly. So some things happened to me last week. I was feeling kind of down. I just remember thinking, wow, you're feeling poor in spirit today. Yeah. And then I thought, well, I'm blessed. That was just, I would have never thought of that if she hadn't brought it up.
Yeah.
And so when she's saying, that's kind of part of the pep talk. Yeah. You're the salt. You're the light.
Oh, that's wonderfully put.
I was just going to add that it's weird that you say that, because when I was thinking about the Sermon on the Mount and kind of starting to read through some of it, I did have the image of kind of being in the locker room before the game, and the coach is drawing up, like telling you, all right, you need to do this, you need to go here, your assignment, and kind of how to go forward. So I kind of thought of that as just a couple days ago.
Yeah. Nice, Skip. Yeah, the pep talk. That's a really good image.
Hey, I just have to add this in here. Speaking of all that, do any of you, or have any of you all watched Ted Lasso?
Have some of you watched it? Yeah. Some
well, See, Hendry messes with my mind because now when I watch Ted Lasso, I'm asking Lee, what does that have to do with the Sermon on the Mount? I think Ted Lasso is, is living this out. So I'd really be interested not to take over this Bible study discussion on it. I just want to know if anyone else has thoughts of Ted Lasso and Sermon on the Mount. Send them my way.
There you go. I need to check. People have told me about that. Lee's told me about that show. I need to check it out.
Well, the pep talk thing, I just had to go there. So
yeah,
it's the soccer coach.
Yeah. Well, the part of the pep talk is, to kind of to Skip's point and yours too, is that it's not about you. If you're the salt, it's not about you. If you're the light, it's not about you.
Yeah, and it's not about winning and losing is kind of Ted Lasso's thing. It's not about winning and losing. It's about the individuals developing their potential and working together.
Yeah.
Does chapter 16 or verse 16, does that become important in any way? That we shine our light in good works?
Yeah, what do you think, Mike? That's a great question.
Well, it seems like we're always being led away from verse 16. It kind of, to me, as you read this, we end up in verse 16 that your saltiness, your light is exemplified by your good works. But somehow, I guess as a result of being somewhat Protestant, we're sort of led away from that.
Yeah. What do y'all think? The Protestant sort of mantra is no works righteousness, right?
My first thought is James.
Yep.
Which I don't remember when, but I think we talked about. But
Faith without works is dead.
Well, and that it's not about the works. Okay, but it's also about the works. But it's not about the works, but it is.
Yeah.
She mentions that on page 51 about the middle.
Yeah, read that for us, Kathy. She's pretty straight up. She's kind of salty about it. read that for us.
The part that says, any faith that does not manifest itself in works is not faith. It is complacency and self-satisfaction. It is not salt because it contributes nothing to the earth. It is not light since its shining is only for self-reflection. Do you want me to keep on?
Yeah, read that whole paragraph for us.
Disciples are to glorify God by being their true selves, salt and light, existing for others rather than only for themselves, and doing works prompt others to do the same. The action of the disciples should be light and salt to the earth and the world, not just to those inside their own house.
Yeah.
Henry, where does this aversion or in the paragraph before that, she talks about her theology students. Let's see here. It says, this comment makes a number of my students nervous. That's works righteousness, they suggest. Where does that fear, or is that a reaction to like pre-Martin Luther Catholicism? Is that where that comes from?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It also shows up in the Old Testament and the prophets. In particular, in the Isaiah passage that's appointed for Ash Wednesday that we just heard. But all over the prophets, where um, you know, the religious people are warned by God and corrected by God and warned by the prophet, saying, your motivations are not good. You're fasting to be seen. You're observing the law to get, sort of esteem and approval, to be famous, to be thought of as pious. And these are not the things that I'm after. Anytime someone comes at me about some kind of churchy liturgical thing, and I'm a priest, so I'm certainly vulnerable to being too churchy. I always remember the prophets where God is very clear when he says, if your sacrifice and your liturgical act, incense, he even calls out incense, is going to be about you being fancy, stop it. Does that make sense? I don't care. God is very harsh through the prophets. And sort of this, then the church, bless our hearts, we got into this whole works righteousness, paying for indulgences and meriting our salvation, and the sort of hierarchy of grace, which was just an abuse. And it's okay, we're humans. We err and stray like lost sheep, as the scripture says. It's just life. But that's where it comes from. So the Reformation then was a real important correction to that. But like all things, it was an overcorrection.
Too far.
Yep,
Yeah, it went too
absolutely, absolutely. The reform went too far. That's why a lot of us, and this is a risky thing to say, and we should be very humble. A lot of us are comfortable, and we're actually a small church, really, the Episcopal Church. A lot of us are comfortable in the Anglican lane or the Episcopal lane because we sort of land in this sort of groove via media in the middle. Which doesn't mean we can't get things wrong. Boy, we do. We need to be super humble. But it's sort of a little bit of a course correction back from the big overcorrection of the Reformation. But the Reformation had to be an overcorrection because the abuse was an over-abuse. Does that make sense? I mean, the pendulum just swings. I'm not blaming Luther. We had to have Luther. We had to have the overcorrection. We had to have the abuses of the Jewish tradition in the Old Testament. So you could have the prophets come in and swing the pendulum back. We sort of live holding the tension. And I think Jesus cuts the groove when he says you're the salt and the light. Because I know these are real familiar images to us, but if we back up from them, man, there's incredible nuance and subtlety in that, isn't there? And if you're the salt, you almost kind of can't pin it down what it means. You just sort of have to keep playing with it. Does that make sense? And if you have an image from Jesus that you just have to keep playing with, you're probably on the right track. What was his favorite way to teach?
Parables.
Exactly. Is there a meaning of a parable? No. That's to allegorize the parables. And there's nothing wrong with allegory. It's just not parable. A parable, you sort of have to keep playing with it. Keep playing with it for all of your life. That's the groove. That's the salt groove, I think.
So in the same way that Jesus' method of teaching, or the metaphors he uses here, are things you have to keep playing with. I mean, he's using them to talk about the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah,
right?
Good.
So kingdom of heaven is like that.
It's
just hard to nail down.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to talk about even. It's just there. It's just everywhere. It's just hard to put words to. That's what we're talking about, I guess.
Why is it hard to put words? I totally agree with you. I'm in the canoe with you, sort of. But why is it hard to put words to, Cynthia?
Sorry, my internet connection's kind of bad, but
okay.
I think you asked me why is it hard to talk about.
That's right. Why is it hard to put words to?
Well, I guess because of what we've already said, that it's really more of you just do it, you just live it. Like the best way to tell it is to just be it. It's the ethic of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And also because it's a past, present, and future reference, and like the kingdom's come, it's here, it's gonna come. I don't know. And I'm kind of stuck living as best I can right now. It's hard for me to talk about future.
Yeah. Well, and is it also a piece of what Skip's saying? When you're sharing, I'm sort of remembering what Skip said it really nicely, is that maybe the kingdom of heaven is hard to talk about and put words to because God's tangled up in it. Like, really, God is causing the kingdom to occur, and we have work to do in that occurrence, but God's working through us and around us and beyond us and within us. Wherever God's involved, mystery is involved. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I think I'm supposed to be the salt, and I'm working out, kind of your point, Cynthia, I'm working out what that means for me today. And then hopefully I'll fall asleep tonight and get up tomorrow and try it again. Jim, did you have an answer to that, Jim? I thought you maybe.
Well, I always sort of default to, I like to try to figure things out. That's just my nature.
Yeah.
But the finite mind trying to describe the infinite, that's an equation that you can't ever balance. It can't ever be solved.
Yeah.
And again, there's some relief in that, right? So I can just let go of that.
Yeah.
For goodness sakes.
Yeah.
Man, I like to try to figure things out.
Yeah.
Well, I think, too, so much of it is a felt experience because it is so beyond our comprehension and experience of the world. Like, a little bit of what you were talking about on Sunday, like, we know that there's something powerful here, that there is something grand that is happening, but to try to describe it feels so impossible sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about John 15, too. Like, I feel like it's the answer to the question, but it also doesn't feel like an answer. So you abide in him, and then there are fruits. And I think fruits are related to works. But, like, how do you know if you're doing the abiding enough? How can you see if you've achieved enough abiding to get some fruits?
Yeah.
If you're chasing after the fruits, you're not going to have it. But, like, there's no way of knowing that you're achieving the abiding unless you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you try to tell someone what it looks like or what it feels like to abide, like, it looks the same but different for all of us.
Sure.
But I think all of it comes back to the letting go of those attempts at our own happiness, But, like, abiding is letting go of those things, which are all the same and all different.
Yeah.
And whenever we find that, we'll find that we're doing works, and there's fruit.
Yeah.
But how did it happen? I have no idea.
Well, I'm with you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to say, for me, kingdom and heaven are just loaded words. That doesn't even, those words don't even go together. Kingdom, to me, reminds me of a king, and heaven is something people talk about a lot. Like, but who knows? How can you? I mean, it's just a mystery that those two words are even together.
Yeah.
That's good. That's always bugged me a lot. Like, one place where it bugs me is those genealogies of Christ, often through his father. And I got what you said, Henry, that was connecting to the Old Testament, and that makes sense to me. But there's another level where I feel like the church started equating Christ with a feudal leader. And that annoys me because it seems like there's so much in the Christ stories entering the world as a newborn baby in a sort of homeless poverty even, and riding into the city on a donkey, on the colt of a donkey. I mean, there's all these things about the meek inheriting the earth and all of his fraternizing with the outcasts that I think is against having this hierarchical thing where this one's better than this one is better than this one.
Sure.
It's like when you do it to the lowest of you, you do it to me. It's like, and then all of a sudden we're going to go back to some traditional thing of the kingdom, and it that's so hierarchical that it really annoys me. Anyway.
Yeah. What's interesting, that's really helpful, but really what's interesting to me is that Jesus comes on the scene proclaims kingdom, let's say, and redefines what kingdom is. And it's sort of a political move because he's doing that in full view of Caesar, right? And the empire. So he says, kingdom of heaven. And then he's like talking about all these poor people and sad people and meek people. So he sort of redefines it. But what you really mirrored to me is look at what Paul seems to prefer over kingdom. You know, what's Paul's favorite sort of, or one of his go-tos? Body of Christ. Very different image, isn't it? You're a hand, you're an elbow, you're an eye, you're a mouth. Body of Christ.
But Henry,
yeah.
Even that image of the body of Christ, my understanding was really largely, well, it was used fairly successfully to prop up feudalism during the Middle Ages.
Sure.
The concept that you're born into a role. You're born into a role as a serf.
Sure.
If you don't perform that role adequately, you're basically damned when you die.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Marilla's touched on a very real concern that I think we just have to acknowledge, which is the fact that Christianity was created in a very feudal type hierarchy, and for centuries Christianity propped up that hierarchy and perpetuated it. And it was not until very recently that Christianity really took on the more inclusive tones that we hold today. I mean, it's just part of human history. I think we have to acknowledge it honestly and just sort of, grapple with it as what it is.
Sure, I think you're right on. Now, let's do a little history. When did that really happen? You remember? Say it.
I'm sorry, what do you mean? The broadening to be more inclusive?
Jim's putting it up. No, not the broadening.
Empire.
When did it really happen that Christianity, I'll use a word, was co-opted for... And it happened. You and Marilla are exactly right. There's no doubt about it. But when was it co-opted?
300s.
Constantine, probably.
Right. Yep, Constantine.
Colonizations.
When Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the empire, then we've got rewards punishment value system comes online. The full-blown downside of feudalism and patriarchy comes online as predominant themes in our religion. Exactly right. And to acknowledge that, I think you're spot on. Absolutely. The tricky thing is, and this sort of the fun part of sort of trying to tease it out, is do we put what Constantine did in the mid-4th century, back on Jesus and Paul? What were you going to say, Mike?
Well, I think that's obviously a big concern. And for example, the book of Revelation is, I think, really taken loose from its moorings because it was an anti-empire book. And suddenly, when the Christianity was a minority against the empire,
right.
Suddenly Christianity became the empire.
Yep.
So Revelation is completely without its original meaning, and it completely becomes, difficult to interpret.
Beautifully put. That's you, Jim. Mike. Let's just pause. Everybody, what Mike just said so succinctly is the problem in contemporary Christianity with the book of Revelation. It's this gross misunderstanding of its original context, which, Mike, I think you just nailed. Thank you. Sorry. Keep going.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah, Mike, teach us.
I'm not an expert on Revelation, but it appears to me that Revelation is a work designed to encourage people who are being kicked around continually by the empire, embarrassed, harassed, and it's a book that gives them, almost like Isaiah, gives them some hope that there's a future, that essentially the empire that's abusing them and stands for everything. Christianity is for the poor and the meek. The empire is for money and power. And suddenly, when Constantine, for one reason or another, adopted Christianity as the state religion, then it's without meaning, because now it's a book to attack the empire, and the empire represents Christianity, so its original meaning is gone, and people have to come up with another meaning, and that's why we have such strange interpretations of Revelation now.
Exactly. And so it's a code. This is sort of my parsing. Not that what Mike said needs anymore, but it's a kind of a code book. I mean, it's an enchanted, all these mythical figures, the beast. It's kind of written in code language, almost like kind of Underground Railroad type text. Like to the marginalized, like Mike's saying. So yeah, beautifully put. What else were you going to say, Mike?
Another thing I was going to say is, that's a problem, but in the context, and I happen to, for a reason I do not know, think of Pierce Plowman. And, it's completely opposite to everything we would think of, that this nobleman goes to Pierce Plowman and says, I want to help you plow. I want to be involved with the community, and I want to help you plow and raise crops. And Pierce Plowman says, you idiot. Why would you do such an awful thing? You're a knight. Your function is to protect us, not to plow. And, that's kind of different from what we would think how society should operate. But Christianity operated in that environment. And I don't think we could expect it to operate any other way. Is that clear at all? I mean,
yeah, that's a really good example. Any follow up for Mike on that? What does that spur in y'all?
I mean, I would say part of it is just authoritarianism in itself sort of feeds on insecurity or fear of people. It's like the more you feel in danger for yourself, the more you're willing to give away for safety. So in those early times, people were pretty accepting of really strict hierarchies and pretty, cruel leaders, because they thought it was better than just, chaos and anarchy.
Sure.
If the village was protected by a strong duke, then that meant the village wouldn't be burned down by the next village over. They didn't have to worry about that as much. So I mean, I think it goes back to like you talking about human development so much. I think it's very important to look at things in the context of development. At that time, there were some very real reasons for strong hierarchy. There were very real reasons for giving up individual liberty in exchange for safety under an authoritarian regime. As society has moved on and our values have changed and our physical situations have changed, those same needs are not there for many of us. They still are for some.
Right.
But for many of us, we don't have to make that trade-off now. And for that reason, just, our view of everything, including religion, changes.
Yep. Very good.
I don't know if I'm making any sense.
No, I think you are. And let's look at this again. You brought us back to the spiral. So again, the Judeo-Christian tradition is, 5,000-6,000 years old. I know Christianity is not, but if you take them as a whole, the text and the stories that we have are coming online, 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. So what you're emerging from is this red stage, the warrior stage, in which what you just summarized red actually really nicely, Tracy. In red, I've got to have a warrior king because it's so tribal and he's protecting me from all the threats that are all around me. Because in red stage, the consciousness that's online is that the world is an inherently dangerous place. And the way to get security within the danger is violence. Might makes right? Brute force. None of these things are online at this point. Just red, magenta, and beige before it. So as we emerge, we realize that's not actually going to get us, we're growing out of that. Let's put it that way. We grow out of red stage starting, 5,000-6,000 years ago. And what emerges is a need for more order because red is too chaotic and too dangerous, exactly to how you just really nicely put it, Tracy. So what makes sense as or that's not the way to put it. We evolve into a patriarchy. One true God, order, hierarchy. Feudalism is one of the things that manifest in as far as our need for order according to life conditions. And this is where Judaism is born. And it is the birth of the patriarchy. As we keep moving, and especially on in today, what we do is we say the patriarchy was a necessary development, but it is no longer a good way to continue. And in fact, every stage has its dignities. The patriarchy got us out of red disaster, but every stage also has its disaster. So the dignity of red stage is it provided for safety in a very dangerous world. The disaster of red stage is that it's too darn violent. It just is not, we can't go on like this. The dignity of blue stage is that it deals with the disaster of red stage by introducing order. And patriarchy is a manifestation of that order. The disaster of blue stage is that it becomes abusive. And now we're all just bowing down to the king and kissing the queen's ring. That's not Christianity. Tracy, does that sort of encapsulate what you're pointing us to? Yeah. I'm glad you mirrored that back to me, Tracy, and you were good at it. You had a second and a third run to push it back to me, and I appreciate that. That's what this kind of conversation is about, because it's helpful to remember every stage has its dignity and its disaster. That's a teacher named Steve McIntosh's language: dignity and disaster. So to be honest, to your point, Tracy, about both is real important. So yeah, go ahead.
The dignity becomes the disaster.
Yes.
When, it's idolatry of the dignity, right?
Good.
I don't know if I can explain that very well, but
good.
I mean, the dignity's good until that's all there is, and that's the most important thing. And then it becomes a disaster.
Right.
Is that tied into the program for happiness? Then I guess is my question.
What a great question. Yeah, go. You know what? Go on.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to get into that with 3 minutes left, but I'm just thinking about my own programs for happiness.
So think about it this way.
If they're idolatrous and...
Sure.
Yeah.
So think about it. You can think about it this way, Cynthia. We can put it kind of simply. It's not simple, but we can maybe put it kind of simply, which will be a doorway into it maybe, and you can just sort of play with it. So the stages are happening on the horizontal level. The dignity and disaster of each is sort of happening on this horizontal level. The programs for happiness, and the stages are happening to the whole human community, right? The programs for happiness are happening to the individual on the vertical level. So wherever I am, whether I'm in a healthy expression of my stage in a dignity sort of season, or a disaster expression of my stage in a unhelpful season, I'm experiencing my own programs for happiness. So I'm an individual with onboard programs for happiness going through these stages. So that's sort of how they relate to each other. So if we circle back to the salt and the light. See you, Jim. If we circle back to the salt and the light to wind down, it's kind of, man, it's so fun to have these tools, because it's like we get to say, okay, I don't have to so much criticize the heritage of my forebears and their patriarchy. Like, I can do that, and I can criticize it, and that's a thing in a way, and it's necessary to Tracy's point. But also, if I'm salt, I can be curious about it. So I can make the shift from criticism to curiosity. And I can sort of look at it and say, how did this come to be? Where's the pathology in it? What was beneficial about it because it carried us from the latest disaster, right? And now how is it becoming pathological again? And so how is it that I want to sort of recognize how, if I'm not in blue stage, let's say, have sort of grown out of that? If I'm salt, what have I kept that was wonderful about that? I do love my country, pledge allegiance to the flag. Um, and how can I sort of be someone who brings out the beauty and is honest about the disaster through conversation with my neighbors? Probably this morning we're an example of it all. We're all salt to each other. I mean, Tracy and I are just having this sort of back and forth. It's like, oh yeah, we're just kind of lights shining on each other's stories in a way that hopefully is gentle and honest and forthright and
Henry,
yeah.
I just one thing that is kind of bringing it together for me, and with Kathy's point when she was talking about something had happened and she went back to the Beatitudes.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to be kind of playful with the coach type thing, but what it does make me think of is the whole thing with the Sermon on the Mount is the world changes so much and is constantly changing. We're going through a lot of change right now, but this speaks to how to live in that context, and it's more about how we should treat people and live with God and those types of things. So I know that there's all of that with the empire and feudalism and all those type things. So anyway, I'm just saying that to me, it helps show us how to live now where we are with God and with other people.
Yeah. Nicely put, Skip. So if we were going to conclude by saying, if we're on a hunt, I just had a flash of that bear hunt song that we teach our little kids. We're going on a bear hunt. Do you remember that? If we're on a bear hunt, did I get that right? Isn't it a bear hunt we're looking for? A bear? Yeah. If we're on a bear hunt, looking for our own values in the Sermon on the Mount, what have we sort of found today? And there's no right answer. We're on a bear hunt. We're just sort of, what have we found today?
For me, it's that at the heart of it, it's not about me.
Yeah.
I'm called to be an enhancer.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
We're called to direct and point. Salt is improving, light is shining focus on, but neither is ever the point.
Yeah. And if I am vocationally salt, and it comes from Jesus, right, Amy? I mean, I'm a Jesus guy, so if Jesus says I'm salt, I'm salt. If I'm vocationally salt, but I'm driven to try to talk Amy Bridges into my way, what is the threat? Why do I feel threatened, unsafe, whatever, and I've slipped out of my role as salt? And maybe the threat's good because Amy's got a knife to my throat and she's about to kill me. So it's like, okay, legit, great, defend yourself. But maybe it's not. Mostly it's probably not, right? Henry, why are you feeling insecure in this moment? Why are you feeling like you got to talk Amy into, doing it the way you do it? Why have you slipped out of being salt? So I like that. Maybe one of the values we discover is that we are enhancers. When I walk into the room, I'm a humble enhancement.
Oh, that resonates for me. When I first became interested in the Episcopal Church, I had several conferences with Richard Burden, who was then the priest of the church in Richmond.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful person. I've kept up with him. He went to Boston. He had a PhD in Chinese history, a very intellectual and broad-minded who wasn't going to try to push you.
Yeah.
But as my interest evolved, I had gone to that church some, which is, they maybe have 15 people on a Sunday morning. And Good Shepherd, I was much more drawn to. And I felt sort of bad. And I told him, that I was thinking attending Good Shepherd, not his church. And he said, no, that's fine. He said, you're on a voyage, and I think of myself as a way station. Take what you can and what you need that will help you continue your voyage. And I loved that. And it sounds like what you just said.
Wow, yeah. Talk about somebody who understood their vocation as salt. My goodness, Marilla, that's beautiful.
Yeah. That's really resonated with me ever since.
Yeah.
Marilla, I attended that same church for a little while, too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's funny.
We can all say that or think about that. I'm a way station. Take what you need and
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah. 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 I'm not the main course. I'm not the destination. I'm a way station. That's really nice. I like that. Well, one thing that helps me, and I keep going back to the spiral dynamics map, but one thing that really helps me as I understand my vocation as salt is to know something about the community, right? So what we know is that in the community of our country, the rough numbers are that 30% of the community that is our country, their center of gravity is in blue stage. 50% of the members of our community are in orange stage, which, do the math with me, which means that 20% are in green stage. So if my center of gravity is in green, and I'm sort of constantly fighting, it helps me to know, oh wait, most of the people, by a pretty big margin, are in different stages of consciousness. So I can sort of re-understand my life as salt instead of convincer. I'm a way station. I'm a light. An enhancer. I love Amy's. I'm an enhancer. An enhancer.
And in different parts of the country, those percentages can be wildly different.
Absolutely. That's good. That's just a composite. You're exactly right. Exactly right.
So you were in Lexington, Kentucky. I mean, I think most urban places tend to be higher percentage of green. But for those of us who are in smaller communities, we're much higher percent blue.
Yeah, sure.
And for you in Lexington, you need to know that there's people. I mean, you have your community, but there's other communities as well.
Amen. Yeah. You mean it's not all about us, Kathy? I thought it was all about Lexington. And even in Lexington, to be aware that there's a wide variety, even in places like here, it's just really, that's just a beauty in it. Nancy, you get the last word.
Yeah, well, the thing that is, okay, so I have a difficult time saying, I don't feel like I should be convincing anybody. I thought that's, I feel like where we're coming from ourselves, where
Sure.
I am right now, is where I can be aware of my friends, my family, my community. I'm in my community, in my state, where I am right now.
Yeah.
And that's not an issue. That should not be an issue of where I am, whatever stage I am.
Correct.
Is that correct? I mean,
A million percent. Everybody has Claire Graves said everybody has a right to be where they are. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Okay. That's
so yeah, I think, and I hope I didn't misspeak, and I may have. My sense of as salt is our role is not convincers. We're enhancers. So what I think is so cool about the salt image is that salt does not add anything, right?
No.
Salt doesn't add anything. Salt brings out the pure authenticity of that which is native or inherent. Salt does not add flavor to the pot roast. It brings out the flavor inherent in the pot roast. And too much salt, like when Nancy tries to convince Henry or Henry tries to convince Nancy, it's too much salt makes the whole thing I don't want anywhere near this pot roast, right? Does that make sense?
And I liked what
Nancy?
Jim said earlier on, because he said, and I can't even say exactly what he said, but early on in our study this morning, he said, we're all at that's where we can have common ground.
That's right.
Which isn't that we can see each other through a different lens.
Good. Right.
Because we have that common ground.
Yep. That's right.
It doesn't matter if you're in the blue or the red or the orange.
Right.
I mean, you are still God's child.
Amen.
It's just fine. It's good.
It's good.
That is good.
That's right.
Am I incorrect?
You are 100% correct. You're 100% correct. And what Jim's point was, and this is where Cynthia was going too, just a few minutes ago, is we all are God's beloved, and we all have these sort of, and this is just Keating's language. If it doesn't work for you, we can come up with different words, but we all have these programs for happiness. No matter where you are in the sort of on life's path or journey, we all have these programs for happiness. Our basic insecurity around our own powerlessness. And kind of what I hear you saying, Nancy, is, or as I'm interpreting, is that's enough to deal with. I don't also need you trying to talk me into being like you. I've got enough problems grappling, like we all do, with my own sense of powerlessness, wherever I am. And so if we can sort of meet each other on that common ground, then what the supposition is that healthy people grow. So if I can leave Nancy alone and just let her be Nancy, a healthy expression of Nancy, and if Nancy can just leave me alone and let Hendry be a healthy expression of Hendry, we're both going to grow. Healthy people do not stay stuck. They just don't. And how Nancy grows or Amy grows or Tracy grows or Hendry, that's none of my business. My job is to love you. Doris Barnes, who said it? Am I right? Not Doris Barnes. Yeah, Doris Barnes, right? Aren't I right, Nancy? Doris Barnes said, the only job any of us has is to love other people. She's right on that. She's exactly right on that. Our own mystic here. She died, for those of you who don't know Doris, she died, Nancy, 2 years ago maybe? Something like that? Long-time member.
No.
Was it a year ago?
Just during COVID.
Oh, yeah. Right.
We were at the cemetery, remember?
She said that to me 2 years ago, but she died a year ago.
Oh, yeah, she said it 2 years ago.
I'm sorry,
she died.
I don't actually have COVID, but COVID has me.
Well, COVID is, no one knows when it was, how it was, when it went, where we are.
No one knows. But yeah, okay, so I had the right person. Yeah, she did say that.
And she did say it several
on her
years
94th
ago.
birthday, she said that to me in the hospital. Yeah, but then she died about a year later. That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Well, that's a good expression of saltiness, isn't it? Doris was in her own way was articulating what it is to be salt. To know that our job is to love other people, is to be salt. Yeah.
Henry, I'm sorry, I missed. What did she say? What did Doris say?
Doris said, and this is a direct quote, we thought she was on her deathbed, but she wasn't. She lived another year, but she thought she was on her deathbed too. She really did. We all did. She looked up at me from what we presumed was her deathbed in the hospital over, I don't know, Nancy, was it Baptist or something like that, somewhere here in Lexington. And she said to me, of course you know, Father Hendry, the only job any of us has is to love other people. And she was 94 years old, and we all thought she was on the very cusp of death. So there's a certain clarity that comes there. I think Doris has probably been clear on that for a long time, but it was a real moment. It was very, very, very thin. And I think that's a good expression of what it means to be salt. Well, that's kind of where we started too, with when Merton said, you don't know love until you love someone. You don't know the depth of love until you've loved someone with no need to change them.
Well, back to your idea about the programs for happiness. A 94-year-old woman on her deathbed is going to the programs for happiness are going to be gone.
Oh, good point. Good point.
At that point. So then the clarity.
Oh, great
what's
point.
important comes.
Yep. Which is, I told the story, Kathy, of Barbara Arwood's death on Sunday. I tell it sometimes, and there was another little part that I don't think I'd ever told before, that I told on Sunday, and she had the same clarity on her deathbed. Literally, she died in that moment where she said, you know, we've opened so many doors for love. Keep opening doors. Keep opening doors. That's the same clarity.
What I just said about there would be no reason to have a program for happiness
Absolutely.
when you're on your deathbed.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that's the teaching of Kathleen Dowling Singh, who was a hospice worker for 40 years. And her research showed, and others have shown this too, everybody lets go. Some people in just the 5 seconds before they die, but everybody lets go before they breathe their last. And what Jesus' invitation to us is to let go sooner than 5 seconds before you die. And I think Barbara and Doris, the two people we're talking about, let go long before they died. But you're making an excellent point. On your deathbed, your programs for happiness are irrelevant. You've let go. That's right. That's right.
Because at that point, you are totally powerless.
That's right. That's right. And for some people who were particularly gripping, they're not going to let go to the last millisecond. But Kathleen Dowling Singh, who for 40 years was doing hospice work, so countless people, she was at their deathbed, right? Said they let go. All of them let go. All of them let go. I don't want to let go in the last millisecond. The reason I hang out with you guys is because I want to learn how to let go, 40 years before I die. Because that's heaven, all the way to heaven.
And there you go. There's the kingdom of heaven, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really, that's how it occurs. If I let go, God will cause the kingdom of heaven to occur right here in my little hula hoop, Thomas. Well, isn't that right? In that room you're in, if you'll let go, God will cause it to occur right there. That's the beauty of it. Well, I'd say we got into it today. That was great. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank y'all. Thank y'all.